Hello, I'm Tone Lanzillo, and this is Climate-Duluth. Our two guests today are Melanie Wallace and Bonnie Waltch with the Climate Emergency Feedback Loops film series. It's great to have you both with us today. Really appreciate you taking some time to be with us here in Duluth. Why don't we begin by both of you just telling us a little bit about this very unique film series and how it began and what's been going on with the project.
Sure, I'll jump in. So the film series is about feedback loops in the environment. The series of films, they're science programs that explain how the Earth is warming, and we explain the mechanisms of feedback loops whereby the Earth is warming itself, because mechanisms are set in motion that release greenhouse gases, which cause more warming, which then create more of the problem. For example, in the Arctic, the sea ice is melting because of the high temperatures there. As the sea ice melts, more dark water is exposed and there's less reflection on the ocean surface. Therefore, it creates even more warming and therefore more sea ice melts. So it's what we call a vicious cycle where the warming creates even more warming. And the films go through several of these feedback loops around four major areas: the world's forests, permafrost in the Northern Hemisphere, the atmosphere, and the albedo effect in the North Pole. So we go through each of these areas and talk about several feedback loops that are going on in each area. The programs got started because we had a producer, Barry Hershey, who had been hearing a lot about feedback loops and was sort of informally questioning friends of his who were very well educated, asking, hey, have you heard about feedback loops in the climate? And at the time, which was about 3 years ago, people generally didn't know about them, didn't know what a feedback loop was, had never heard of them in terms of climate. And so he set out to make these films. He approached my colleague Susan Gray and me, and we ended up making this series of films to educate the public about feedback loops. Now, it turns out in the last 3 years, feedback loops have become a much bigger part of the public conversation. There's a lot more about them, and I think most people probably do know about them now. But actually, you'd be surprised how many people still don't know the actual mechanisms that go on. And we have people who have seen our films and have said to me, I thought I knew a lot about the climate and global warming, but now I really understand what's going on. So our films really do take a deep dive explaining that.
What venues and what platforms have you been able to share these films?
The original concept from the producers, when I was brought on to the film team to help expand the exposure for these films, was to create 5 short videos and to put them up on a website and make them easily available to educators and community groups, which is still a great idea. But when I came on board, I said, you know what we can do in addition to that is we can make a 1 hour that we can put on PBS, hopefully, which we did, and also sell internationally to other broadcasters so that we can increase the people who have easy access to watching them. So I think it was in the fall of 2021, Bonnie, when the films were on PBS, right?
No, December 2021.
December 2021
yes.
was when it first broadcast on PBS, and then it's had many different broadcasts as well, because that's how PBS works. You know, there's the premiere and then there's many other ones. And we have an international distributor, and he's been selling it all over the world. And it's been seen on broadcasters in New Zealand, in Sweden, in Italy, and France, lots of places. And then what Bonnie and I are working on together is to expand the reach of the 5 short films, which live on a website on YouTube right now. And you can easily find them, and you'll see the link at the end of our conversation. And so I now am trying really hard to find ways to expand and bring people's attention to these films that are available free on the YouTube website. So for example, we've begun working with Rotary International, who are very interested and keen on spreading the word about feedback loops and tipping points. And so right now we're trying to create what they're calling is a climate education or climate change action toolkit. So that will be the 5 films. And then in addition, on the website, we'll have resources that will be available to enhance the information that's in the films. So we're looking for books and articles and TED Talks and all kinds of additional resources that will be packaged together and made very easily accessible, so that when it gets spread to the, to the Rotary International clubs, which are all over the world, it will be easy for them to want to bring people together, watch the films, and then discuss what kinds of actions people can take as individuals, as communities, and as people who are trying to get their governments to be more responsive. So we're really excited about this partnership.
Yeah, and let me just add that we've also been doing a lot of outreach to schools. These films are perfect for use in schools because they're between 8 and 14 minutes each. They're very digestible in pieces. And so we've been doing a lot of outreach with teachers conferences, like science teachers conferences. I went to Kansas actually and showed clips from all the films and gave a talk at the Kansas Science Teachers Association conference in April. And we're reaching out to all kinds of school districts and just trying to get them out there for use in schools, because one of our goals is to really teach the next generation about what's happening with the climate. So we're doing all kinds of outreach like that. And I also wanted to just add that when we finished the 5 shorts, we had this incredible launch in January of 2021, before we made the PBS film, the 1 hour. And we were able to get the Dalai Lama and Greta Thunberg on a virtual Zoom conversation with 2 of our scientists. And they met for the first time ever on our event. And we were able to capture video. We recorded it, of course. And so then we incorporated some of their conversation into the PBS film. So that was really exciting for us to be able to add that material into the longer version.
And we've been told by the Mind and Life Institute that over 1 million people signed up to watch the launch worldwide.
Yeah,
so
they hosted it.
Yeah, so that started, with a lot of energy.
Yeah.
And then recently we've been reaching out to different countries outside the US. So we've gotten the films to be part of a climate change exhibit at the Science Museum in Seoul, Korea, which was very exciting. And they translated it into Korean and made it available. And it's still up there. If you're in Seoul, go to the Science Museum, you can see it. And now we're talking to the person in charge of climate policy for Kenya. And this person is in the president's office at Kenya. And in the fall, I think in September, they're going to have a climate action week in Kenya, and our films will be part of that presentation. So we're actively working with them to make that happen.
Wow.
Yeah, so we're in touch with a teacher in China who's interested in using the films in classrooms that they're part of. So we're trying to really expand what would be a conventional way of distributing the films.
Right. And don't forget that what's happening in South America, Melanie. We have these
we have
helping us in South America.
In Ecuador, we have 2 team members who are working very, very diligently and have been able to get everything in Spanish and are spreading the word. They're working closely with Scientist Rebellion, the group that's particularly working in Ecuador and Argentina and Peru and those parts of Central South America. So yes, we're really excited about that too.
Well, I just want to let you both,
Sorry.
Just want to let you both know that yesterday I met with Brett Cease from the Citizens Climate Lobby, and he was talking about your outreach with that organization and sharing your films, which you really appreciated. Yeah, really appreciated.
Yes. My colleague Susan and I were invited to be the keynote at the Citizens Climate Lobby annual conference last June, where we went to Washington and showed four of the films for about 200 people that came to the conference.
Wow.
And that was really exciting. And we have had some webinars with some of the CCL chapters. For instance, we did a webinar where we showed one of the films to a chapter that several chapters that were in Texas, Mississippi, and Louisiana.
Right.
an event with them on Zoom, and it's really fun to be able to share the films with chapters all over the country.
I say we were invited through a contact that Bonnie had to present to the state legislature in Massachusetts. They were facing some climate legislation, and the people involved in the climate committee were interested in having us show some films and bring our scientists and engage the lawmakers in a conversation. And apparently it was very successful for them. So that's on our list also. We want to reach out to state legislatures. So get in touch.
We'll find a few. I'm always interested in asking this question, but for both of you, where did your interest in the environment or climate change come from or begin?
It's a good question. Well, for me, I mean, I think I was like most people who believed in climate change and knew climate change was happening and was very concerned about it. I wasn't so much an activist at that point. It just was serendipitous that I was asked to work on this film project. It did not originate from me, but once I started working on it and digging into the research around climate change and feedback loops, I got more and more alarmed and became more and more educated, and then became much more of an advocate, especially being able to use these films to advocate. So I guess my journey really started seriously with this film project. Before that, I was, I tried to be a careful consumer. I'm very anti-plastic. I already had wanted to get, a hybrid car and put solar panels on my house. I was sort of a typical progressive that way. But working on this project really opened my eyes to the issue in a much deeper way.
It came to me in a different way. I started my career as a science filmmaker by working at the PBS Nova Science series in the 80s. And the second film I was given to work on was a co-production with the UK-based broadcaster called Channel 4. And they were making a film called Climate Crisis, The Climate Crisis. This is like 1982, 83. And they wanted Nova to be a partner with them. And so I was assigned to find American-based stories that would fit into the film, and we would work on it together. So I had the idea, why don't I interview Representative Al Gore? He's been talking about climate change. And so I went to Washington and I interviewed him, and it was really, really interesting. He hadn't done his film or anything. He was just a very progressive politician in those days. And that's how I started. Being brought into this world and seeing what people were doing. And so I just went on YouTube the other day to put the climate crisis, Nova, PBS, and somebody took my interview with Al Gore and put it on YouTube. It exists. In 2023, you can see him talking as the young representative from Tennessee. It's really interesting.
Wow.
So that started my journey, and then I've been very sensitive to this. And, we were at Nova making many other films over the years, but this was the first one, 1983. And
Wow.
yeah. And, Michael Mann was one of the scientists who was interviewed. And, when you go back, and Stephen Schneider from Colorado, from the Boulder Climate Center, and people were saying in 1982, 83, we have to do this now. We have to reduce the warming now, or by the end of the century, we'll be facing some consequences. And that would have been the year 2000. And it's 2023. And that's what people are saying now, because now you can feel it.
Right. And no one did anything no one paid attention, except Jimmy Carter put solar panels on the White House. And then that was all.
And somebody took them off, right?
Reagan.
It's like, I have solar panels in my house, and sometimes I don't have to pay my energy bill. I'm giving power to the grid. It's wonderful.
No, I appreciate you sharing your personal stories. For the both of you, what motivates or inspires you to do this work? Because I know the work can be challenging for any of us working on climate change. But yeah, what motivates and inspires you both?
I think what motivates me is seeing films actually make a difference, seeing it impact policy and change. Like Melanie alluded to the session we had with the Massachusetts state legislature, where they were considering some bills that would protect state forests, which is a big, an important thing to do for climate change, is protect old growth forests. And we had this session where we showed our forest film to 60 legislators and aides. And I saw my local rep recently, actually, earlier this year, and asked him if, there was any kind of upshot to the session that we had presented to them. And he said, yeah, I really think the bills passed because of your presentation. At least it made an impact. So it gives me so much hope when I see people willing to learn about it and have it change their thinking and influence policy. It gives me hope when I see teachers teaching it to students, knowing that they're going to grow up with a much better understanding than any of us had about how the climate works. So I guess the outreach we're doing is what motivates me and gives me hope. And the feedback I hear from people who've seen both the short films and the 1 hour, saying that they really appreciated how clear they are, how they finally really understood how it all worked because of how we explain things in the film. So that's super gratifying to me as a filmmaker and a climate activist.
Yeah, just to add to what Bonnie said, we got an email out of the blue one day from a person named Reverend Rachel, who is from the Anglican Church in South Africa. She found our films, she saw them. She was preparing to make a speech in Ghana that would be a speech in Ghana to her colleagues, including a person who would be in the audience named the Archbishop of Canterbury. And so this was a very high profile event, and she thought our films would help her. And of course we said, yes, use them, please. And she did. And, that just came because of the power of the films that Bonnie and Susan made.
Right. And the punchline is that because of that, they all agreed to sign the anti-fossil fuels pact. The whole Anglican Church signed some pact to not use fossil fuels. And our films were used as part of that advocacy effort.
Right. And then she also made the point to say, well, we're in South Africa, we're the Anglican Church, but in the United States, the Anglican Church is the Episcopal Church. And it just so happens we have a bishop who's very involved in this. We call her the Eco Bishop, and she's in Kansas. And this happened right before Bonnie was on her way to Kansas to speak to the science teachers in Kansas. So Bonnie was able to meet the Eco Bishop and bring her to meet the science teachers. So I just love when those things, the synergy of those kinds of connections. But in terms of what really motivates me is love, because I have children and I have grandchildren in my life, and you want them to have a planet that's beautiful and healthy, like the planet that we were blessed to grow up with. And fear, because if we don't act now, they're not going to have it. And so being empowered by love and fear, I think is motivating. And I think the films that I was luckily brought in to participate with and, to work with Bonnie and Susan, which has been so inspiring, express the urgency in a very clear and powerful way. And when people feel the urgency, and they're worried about the people in their lives who they love, they find a way to be more active. And that's what we have to do. We have to reduce the CO2. That's the bottom line. And it can be done. It's not too late, but people need to act.
Yeah. Currently, and maybe in the near future, where will you all be putting your energy or focus, either with this film series or other projects you're working on?
Since I am a filmmaker, first and foremost, I have actually moved on to another filmmaking project, which I'm working on with a friend of mine from college who came out with a memoir last year about how it took her 25 years to get a diagnosis of bipolar 2. So our film is about the bipolar spectrum. And it's really the first film of its kind that's educating the public about the fact that there can be bipolar with no mania, that it's often misdiagnosed as depression, and there's actually a spectrum of bipolar. It's an incredibly heterogeneous disorder. And so we have this wonderful cast of characters that we're going to be profiling, and cutting edge science that shows great promise in terms of diagnosis and treatments. And we're putting together a film that we hope will be a PBS broadcast and a series of short videos to educate specific audiences to use ancillary educational videos. So that's what I'm involved in. Melanie is a senior consultant with us, working with us. So it's fun to be involved in another project with her.
Yeah, I'm really
Cool.
looking forward to that. But I'm continuing to work as the impact producer for the climate emergency feedback loops. That's really important to me and will continue. And we're starting to have some success, so that's gratifying. And then I'm also working on a couple other films. One of them in particular is about drawing people's attention to how Jewish people resisted the Holocaust. And this film will be coming out. It's been starting to get accepted into some festivals. And it's an important lesson because of the rise in anti-Semitism that's happening around the world. And it's
Right.
kind of, you know, shine a light on some of what happened in the past. So between mental
Right.
health, climate change, and educating people about the Holocaust, I have a lot of action going on in my
Do.
It's all appreciated.
But I
Yeah.
think what Melanie and I have in common is we both are social activist filmmakers. Like, we want to make change. We want to educate and impact policy, impact, like with the bipolar film, impact the whole landscape of bipolar, really educate the public and clinicians who are not diagnosing it properly. So we have big goals, big aspirations to educate the world.
right.
Yeah.
And we have learned, and I've learned this through my career at Nova, that when you tell the right story, you can really, even if it's a science story, right? So just a little detour. Nova is 50 years old this year. And the man who started Nova because he spent a year at the BBC and saw that there were science documentaries on TV in England, and they were very successful. And he came back to WGBH and said, let's make science TV. And they thought, science on TV, it's for schools, but hey, if you can do it, raise the money, you can do it. So guess what? He did it. And he thought, well, this will be a short-lived science series. We'll call it Nova. Those stars are bright and then they disappear. 50 years later, his vision is being realized. And
Wow.
what we learned over the years was that you can tell a story and it can be driven by science and curiosity. And if you bring those together, then people are engaged and they want to see it. They're not educational films. We're not teaching you about, you know, math, but you're using math to answer a question that you want the answer for. And I think, you know, we've been blessed, both Bonnie and I, to have that experience and to learn those skills. And it works. People learn the story, they want to, you know, continue and change. And so, and thank you to PBS for having such a home for Nova and science programs.
Yeah.
Right. Given all the projects and the work that you both do, whether it's mental health or the climate crisis, what are your hopes for the future? What are your dreams or hopes for the future, given all the work you're doing and all the people you collaborate with?
Honestly, we're going to reduce the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. That's my hope.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I certainly hope the climate films have an impact on policy and really help sort of drum it into people's heads who need to know this, that we've got to make a change. We've got to make a change yesterday. And it's not too late, but
not too late.
It has to be taken
now.
Right. So that's my biggest hope. And then, of course, for the bipolar film, our hope is that, you know, our goal is to save lives and the stigma, provide hope for those suffering.
Right, right. Well, I want to thank you both for being with us today on Climate-Duluth, and I really appreciate your time. I'm sure we're going to stay in touch through the various climate campaigns we're doing here in Duluth and in Minnesota. And speaking on behalf of Duluth, really appreciate everything that you're doing. It's very valuable, very valuable. Yeah.
Thank you. And I hope everyone can watch our short films because they're free on the web, and I know there's going to be a card with the website address. So please watch the films and spread the word, because the best way to talk about climate change is to have conversations with people, and these films are great conversation starters.
I just wanted to thank you for including us and giving us the opportunity to share our passion for these films.
Well, my pleasure. Great to have you, and we'll stay in touch, and I hope you have a good day.
Thank
Thank
you.
So you guys
Bye.
take
Thanks.
care.
You too. Bye-bye.